Begin with roll call, Joan.
Charles Long,
Here.
Chris Mortensen, Michael Shaw,
Here.
Priscilla Benali,
Here.
Kevin Mitchell.
Here.
We do have a quorum. Thank you, Joan. So I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time and begin with Pledge of Allegiance and New Mexico Pledge. Priscilla?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the zealous symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures.
Thank you, board members. Let's go down to item number 2, approval of the agenda.
Mr. Long, I'd like to go ahead and approve the agenda.
Okay,
Make a
motion's been made by Priscilla Benali to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan.
Kevin Mitchell,
Yes.
Priscilla Benali,
Yes.
Michael Shaw,
Yes.
Charles Long.
Yes. We have approved our agenda for today's meeting. Let's go down to item number 3, approval of the meeting minutes of the January 31, 2022 board meeting. Board members?
I'd like to make a motion, approval of the minutes of the January 31st, 2022 meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion's been made by Michael Shaw and second by Priscilla Benali to approve the meeting minutes of January 31, 2022. Roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Benali,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. Let's go down to 3B, approval of special meeting minutes of February 10th, 2022.
Motion to approve the special meeting minutes of February 10th, 2022.
Okay, motion's been made by Michael Shaw to approve the special meeting minutes of February 10, 2022. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Priscilla Benali. Roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Benali,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. Let's go down to item number 4, approval of the consent agenda items.
Mr. Long, I'd like to go ahead and motion to approve. I did have some questions earlier, and the staff have answered my questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, motion's been made by Priscilla Benali to approve the consent agenda item. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Miss Benali,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. We approve our consent agenda items. Let's go down to study circle. Any public comment? No public comment. Let's go down to study circle B, superintendent's report. Mike?
President Long, members of the board, I wanted to give a update on a few different items. The first one, I know that you have received updates throughout the legislative session, but I thought it would be good for a public meeting for the community and for you, if there's other questions, to talk about the legislative session. Also talk a little bit about staffing for this upcoming year. And lastly, to talk about a little bit about the surveys that have gone out for strategic planning. I'm just going to do some highlights of some items that, again, nothing has been signed by the governor yet with respect to education, and so these are just bills that have passed, or in one case, I'll mention a bill that did not pass, which was a good thing for us. And so I'll just give you a few highlights, and if you have any questions, I'll share.
Mr. Hyatt, is that legislative update in here in our packet?
No, it's just me giving you some, it's
It's
really
just
just
a
a highlight of what you received in your email.
Yeah, it's
So-
just a verbal report. I think we've been getting emails from our lobbyists.
And so for, obviously, the funding for House Bill 2 included some things with respect to education, and there were some bills also that require a $15 minimum wage for all school employees. And so there's about 10 point something million or 15 million approximately that was allotted for that. And so we're hoping the governor obviously signs that, so all the pay for every employee in our district will be at least $15 per hour. Also, as you know, there were minimums set for teacher increases or minimums, and the minimums are $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for level 1, 2, and 3 respectively. With those numbers, there is also a law that requires a certain multiplier factor that makes a high school principal $112,000 for a yearly salary. And so, although those are the base, there are additional dollars that can be earned by the teachers with respect to extended learning, K-5 plus, and what's called K-12 plus, which is similar, but K through 12, obviously. And so those items have to be negotiated with the union to decide if they want to participate or not. But for example, if we were to do extended learning, which I believe adds 6 more days onto our calendar, that would include a 3% additional funding for every teacher. And so it could be 50,000 plus an additional 3% of that, or 60 or 70,000 plus additional 3% of that. Again, that has to be negotiated. This last year, as you know, we did not participate in extended learning. The union believed or stated that their teachers did not want to work the extra 6 days and forego the extra raise increase. I suspect that we will, during negotiations, talk about whether extended learning is something that they want to do or not. As of thus far, throughout the last 4 or 5 years, we have been proponents of that and made that an item on negotiations, and I suspect we'll do the same.
Excuse me, Superintendent.
Yes.
For that, last year, I know we didn't participate in the extended learning, but did we do our own survey as to our teachers to see what their input was, or did we just take what the union told us?
President Long, Mr. Mitchell, I'll just say this. You have to be a little bit careful because in the end, legally, we don't represent the staff. And so you have to be careful about what kinds of things you ask or don't ask when they're being represented by another entity. And so we did not do a survey for staff. There was a potential for that to cause a problem with respect to it looking like us representing the union versus, or us representing the employees versus the union representing those employees. So we did encourage them to survey, and they said that they did survey, and they said that a majority of the members did not want to do extended learning. And so that's all I can say. I did not see any survey results or anything like that.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to ask, as if there was any survey results that you saw, and if, I don't know if we're even able to ask for that.
We did ask for that.
But they don't have to provide it, they don't want to, or?
No, as a body, they are the ones that represent, and they can choose what they want to share or not share with respect to that type of information.
Thank you.
Extended learning, as I mentioned, I also mentioned K-5 plus and K-12 plus. If those are, that's basically 25 more days of school that can be provided for students. If that was something that was negotiated and it was agreed upon, then that would be at the daily rate. It's not a percentage of a raise. It's actually in a daily rate form, so 25 days worth of daily rate pay for those instructors. Next, there also was a piece of the bill that requires a 7% increase also for all employees. And so one of the things that I mentioned, and I'll mention again here in public, is that it's going to create a lot of what we call compaction issues with salaries. Like you want a supervisor to make more than the person underneath them. And so there's going to be, as we negotiate and as we work through those, I just want to make sure everybody's understanding that you don't want like a principal can't, it's not going to make less than a teacher, for example, hourly rate or daily rate. And so we'll run the numbers for all of that and present it to you at some point here in the spring once negotiations are over. Also, one of the exciting bills that came out was HB 60, and that requires that Navajo language and culture teachers or native language teachers also are on the salary schedule at a minimum of the first level one, which is $50,000. And so that will be a significant, I don't know what percentage increase that is, but it's going to be 40% or so increase in pay for those employees. It's pretty significant. Don't hold me to the 40%. I'm just saying it's a significant amount, and I can send you that information. And so that's a great bill that went through, and so that doesn't have to be negotiated. It's automatically at least level one pay. The other interesting bill that came out was HB 119, and this is a bill that has to do with increasing dollars into the SB 9 2 mil revenue stream that all districts receive. And so as of right now, I want to double check because the analysis of that bill showed that we would get different levels of dollars additionally. But one of the numbers I believe was the closest, around 1.6 million more dollars for GMCS in capital revenue this next year. 1.6 million.
Okay.
So those are dollars that can be used for a variety of things, but typically capital like expenditures, buildings, infrastructure stuff. So the next one is SB 14. This is a bill that died, and due to I think it was a 33-33 vote. This was a bill to raise gas tax, and if you noticed the last day or so, gas has raised 20 cents per gallon. It was projected this would be 30 to 35 cents more a gallon, the result of this particular bill, which was more regulation on, I believe it was on oil and gas producers. And even though this is an example of a bill that is not an education bill, but it would have resulted in probably at least a $50,000 increase in our fuel costs per year. And so we heavily advocated against that. In the end, most, if not all, of our local legislators voted against that, but there was a lot of conversations happening, trying to make sure that didn't go through. For one, obviously we're coming out of a pandemic and pocketbooks are tight with money, and so raising that with other things that are happening in the world that could potentially really dramatically increase fuel prices, this would have been tough for us. If gas goes higher, which some people are projecting it to go, that would probably increase that number significantly on our fuel costs. And there was no dollars allocated through any other bill that would have replenished those dollars to us. So it would have been a loss. Fortunately, transportation funding in the legislative session this year, it was a bill that held it harmless. And so even if we have a reduction in students being transported on buses, which many districts have less students on buses because so many students left the state, we are held harmless in that funding, and so we won't have a reduction. So that was a good bill too. And that was HB 57, House Bill 57. A couple more really quickly. HB 73 was a bill that we were strongly supporting and actually worked pretty heavily with a few other superintendents in the state on creating the Return to Work bill. And essentially that is House Bill 73, and it allows somebody who has reached retirement age that's planning to retire, it allows them after a 90-day sit-out period to come back to work. Currently, the law states that it's a full year of sitting out before you can come back to work in a public school setting if you're a public school employee. The purpose of this bill was to help us better attract and keep, to some extent, teachers in our classrooms. So if they do want to retire, instead of having to sit out a year, they can come back within 90 days and work for us again. Hopefully it was to help us have more teacher availability and the teacher pool being larger to help fill vacancies. As we'll talk about in a second, how staffing is becoming very competitive right now. It actually has been and will continue to be, I'm sure. Lastly, HB 13 was an interesting bill that's going through, and again, all these still have to be signed by the governor. I want to be careful how I speak about them because they're not official yet. But House Bill 13 allows for student teachers who have never typically received pay to be student teachers in schools they now can earn $35,000 while they are student teaching and getting ready to get licensed. That's an exciting bill because we do have a lot of people in our community and around that want to come and student teach for us, and it's a great way to attract those students to come work for us. And so being able to pay them is a benefit, obviously, to them financially as they're still in school, but allows us hopefully to attract them to Gallup McKinley County Schools also. I'll stop there before my next two items. Are there any questions on the legislation?
Questions,
that I
board
talked
members?
about?
Mr. Long, I have a couple.
Priscilla?
Thank you very much. So I was writing as quickly as I can, but the question I had was, you did say something about teachers and principals. How about all of our other support staff, which would be including our bus drivers, secretaries, librarians, all the support staff? Is there any additional funding for them that was approved?
Yeah, I apologize. I was moving quite quickly. President Long, Ms. Benali, but there's a 7% increase minimum.
Okay.
That it doesn't mean that it couldn't be more than that. There's some negotiations that have to take place on what that actually ends up being, but an average of 7%. Really, that's inflation this year. I've read a lot of information out there that if you're not increasing by 7%, you're not keeping up with inflation as it skyrocketed recently. So, yeah, it's for all staff, $15 minimum, 7%, and then there's some minimum sets at 50, 60, 70 for teachers and 112 for high school principals. And then the rest is a negotiated item, but it at least has to have the 7% average.
And I know you said that this needs to be signed by the governor, the HB2, which has the minimum wage in there. So are you saying at this time we still have staff that are under that $15 minimum wage
Correct.
rate?
Correct. There are staff that make minimum wage is a little bit lower than that, and so this is a good bill to move people up in the funding behind it to do that. This was a governor bill, or she was a part of the support for this, so we suspect that it will be signed. This is also one of the things that we were asking for in the Ozzie Martinez lawsuit for close to these minimums. We're actually a little bit higher than these, I believe. And so there was a lot of, I think everybody's on the same page with the minimums and the increases.
So no matter if she signs it or not, can we as a district continue that effort?
We as a district always continue to look for ways to pay people more money, but as you know, that also is a negotiated process that we do with those that are represented by the union, but there also has to be funding behind it. So there's a lot of parameters or constraints that come into play, especially if there's not funding provided for it. This bill does fully, what we see, fully funds these bills. As you know, sometimes bills come through and they're not fully funded, and then you actually lose money to implement the law, which is a sad state. But this year, I think the legislators did a pretty good job, probably better than I've seen in many years, as to actually funding what they're passing. So that's good.
And this part, I would like to say in my own language, Bahinson, Diko HB 60 Gisto, you see, Galchini Kada, what Igito, the Anhini Zabaya, the Kiki, Galchin Udas, Aho, Shekhujo, to, I don't know how to say it in Navajo, but it comforts my heart. Jane Jonoko, Yadisnado, Shanjon, Do Bahas Ziti, Ada, Santa Fe, Bahas Zito, Ashkoneko, Yegon, Kachin, Dibazaya, Yadas Kigi, Makada Docha, the snow, Bahas Ziko, and I appreciate it. Thank you for the legislators. I know, we still have to do the signing part of it, but it's nice to know that our indigenous people are supported with HB 60, and our teachers are going to be receiving some additional funding. So I appreciate that. So thank you very much for that. The other question I had was on HB 14. What was their, what what was the reasoning behind this? What was the positive side of this? Because it just seemed like everything that we've heard was like on the negative side, and and then my second question is, I would really like to know which local legislators supported this and didn't support it, and if they fully understood how this will affect or impact our kids' transportation. And that's it.
Sure. President Long, Ms. Benali, with respect to, it's actually Senate Bill 14, and I don't know that I can necessarily speak to the intent or the sponsor's reasoning for all of it, but essentially this bill was increasing regulation on these companies that I believe produce fuel in some form or fashion. And so what happens whenever even if you increase minimum wage, state minimum wage, or you increase regulations, there's costs that are associated with that, and those costs are typically passed on to the consumer. And so either the rationale was because I'm assuming they felt these regulations were important, either environmentally or for some other reason, was probably the reason. As far as local legislators, I mean, I could do a count of all of the votes for or nay, but on the floor I know that our local legislators, at least in our area, that I can remember that I saw, voted against it when it hit the floor. Before that, I'd have to put a tally together because it goes through several different committees and we have different people on different committees. So I wouldn't want to speak about anybody individually, but I can get you a scorecard on that.
I appreciate it.
Sure. But in the end, it's good. In my opinion, like I said, I wasn't an expert in this, but the costs associated with it that would be passed on to the consumer would be pretty significant. And maybe those regulations are better later on down the road, but right now it would be a significant cost to New Mexicans and also to our school district.
Kevin?
Okay. I just had the one question. I know that sometimes when there's pay increases or bonuses or whatever that are given out, that sometimes our administration, such as yourself and maybe assistant superintendents, are not eligible for the increase in pay. So can you? I know I think for sure you're not, but your assistant superintendents and your deputy are they in this for increase in pay of 7% or?
Yeah, President Long, Mr. Mitchell, the 7% average is for everybody other than the superintendent. Now the question we're still waiting for is whether contracted employees are going to be given money so that we can pay the contracted employees the minimums. That's something to be determined. There is a lot of, this was not, the negative thing in this legislation is it was not very cleanly written. I think there was some intent in some of this that was good intentions, but sometimes when legislators pass things and it actually hits the ground and you have to implement it, it can be very problematic and difficult to do. And I'll give you one quick example. I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but part of this bill is actually what they called, quote, a 3% of 1/4 of the salary retention incentive for this year. So they put a little extra money so people get a little bit more money this year before next year, and calling it some sort of retention pay or retention stipend is what they called it. But the language around that, it's actually not 3. People think it's a 3% raise. Well, really, it's at most 0.75% increase, which is not necessarily a lot of money as it sounds when it says called 3%. And with years rolling over and a whole host of other issues with tax ramifications and insurance ramifications, it becomes very, very, very complex. So there's going to be a few things we have to negotiate and work through with the union on that. But overall, it's all employees in New Mexico on the average for the 7%, and then the minimums. So like a high school principal has to make at least $112,000, and the teachers are 50, 60, 70. Unless further negotiations happening, implement certain programs, then the pay can go up from there. But the average of 7% is for all employees outside of superintendents. So.
Okay. And so once the governor signs or doesn't sign, does it become effective immediately, or is it become effective next school year?
Most of it applies to next school year, except for that retention stipend that I talked
Yeah.
about. That piece would start on April 1st. And essentially the way it's written is that on April 1st through the rest of the contract, there would be 3% of whatever that amount is, not for the whole year, just from April 1st to the end of the contract. Which for example, you know, somebody making, let's just do a number of $50,000, it would be, and it was actually, the rest of their contract was exactly a quarter of the year, which it's not, but it's probably a little less than that. It would be 0.75%, which, you know, is a little less, you know, pretty, three to $400, something like that. So.
Any other questions, board members? Nada. Okay. Mike?
Yeah, the next two are fairly quick. I'll just run through them. One of the things that I wanted to notify the board and the community is staffing. I know there's always a hot topic about, you know, how many teachers are leaving or coming or going, hired, etc. And so what we did this year is we put together some trend data for several years on how many people signed their letter of intent that we just sent out, and versus how many actually resigned by the end of the year or by July. And 3-4 years ago, we probably, within this period of time, by July, we would have had maybe 200 teachers leave. Last year it was 103, and we expect it to be similar this year, maybe a little bit less with projected numbers. And so that's a positive thing. We actually have seen a decline in the number of people that are resigning or retiring from the district. And that's a positive thing. Obviously, the pandemic does play a part in that, probably for some. But coupled with some of the pay increases, the return to work bill, and other incentives that we're proposing as a district, we hope to retain and fill our positions much quicker this year. One of the problems with legislation is that it's typically done for the whole state, except with respect to HB 60 for the 520 licensed teachers. And so what happens is, when you're trying to attract teachers to your community, whether you're us or Logan compared to an Albuquerque, on average, more people like the conveniences in Albuquerque versus Logan, or for example, or McKinley County. It's not true for everybody, but for many. And so, as a district, you'll see today in one of the action items that with the federal funding that we have an opportunity to be super competitive as a district to attract and fill our positions. We didn't lose a lot of teachers last year, but across the state, across the country, we had a hard time finding and actually recruiting teachers during the year. And so that was very, very difficult. People have hunkered down, probably due to the pandemic and the rising costs of housing and all the different things that are happening across the country. And so we know that we need to be more competitive and more competitive than our neighbors, definitely in the state of New Mexico and across the country, so that we can attract the best quality teachers that we can as a district. And so we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I kind of wanted to give you an idea of what we're expecting by July of how many teachers will not be here. And some of those teachers either retiring, leaving for other work, some may be leaving the country. They have to return to their home country where they're from for a period of time before they can reapply. So there's varying reasons. On average, this last year or so, teachers that have left, we've seen a consistent either a family or other wanting to be closer to home to family is one of the main reasons people have returned or left the district. Last item is, I just want to give you an update. We have put out and received back almost all of our surveys that we have let you know that we were going to do with respect to our strategic planning, so we can schedule that session and revise our strategic plan Elevate 2022 for the next period of time. And so we are still waiting on budget surveys and community surveys to come back for input from them. We've already sent out surveys to students, staff, and parents. And so we've received those back, and we'll compile that data so that you'll have community input, and local and around the McKinley County, so you have more input to decide what it is next that we need to modify, eliminate, or add to our strategic plan. I suspect that we will be looking to schedule in right after that first week in April, probably right in there, mid-April, for our first strategic planning session to revise as needed our strategic plan.
Excuse me.
Sure.
For the
Kevin?
strategic planning surveys, we mentioned students, staff, parents, community. Do we get like a survey just from like each chapter that's out there? Like, how'd your chapter do a survey with their officials and their groups, Twin Lakes or whatever? Do we get surveys from the chapters?
We
Or is
do,
it just-
Mr. Mitchell, President Long, Mr. Mitchell, we do, that's the community survey. Everybody that's not a parent, student, or staff, that is that next survey, and it goes out to everybody, and we send it to chapters, and post it, and so on Facebook, et cetera. So I don't know if Giovanna's on the line. Do you know what other ways, is Giovanna on? Giovanna, what do you know which ways we put that survey out? We usually do it the same every year, and we've had pretty good success as of late. And again, it's not due back till middle March. It was the last survey that went out.
So, Mike, I apologize for the delayed response, but yes, we have put those out on Facebook, in the newspaper, through various different methodologies, and the community survey is still open until the middle of March. Anybody who needs access to that survey and they want to connect.
She fizzled out. So, again, we put it out the same way we do every year. I'll double check. We usually do paper format also, and we send that out to chapters, but I'll make sure that happens. We still have 3 weeks before it's due. So.
Thank you.
If not, that concludes President Long, my reports today.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Next one, notices and communications. Board members, you can read those on your own and put them on your calendar. We go to new business, 6, new business. We have 3 action items. Action item A, approval of revenue bond application to the State New Mexico Finance Authority for a centralized teachers apartment complex. Mike?
President Long, members of the board, as there have been some discussions and some talks about increasing teacherages, we have been doing that across the county, and there will be new ones coming. As we build a new building, we have found that the PSFA is more open to us attaching more teacherages to the PSFA school building applications. And so that will be happening at Crown Point and Theroux and also Tehachapi. We're also putting some more teachers housing next to Twin Lakes here for this next school year. And then obviously, as you know, you've seen a few pictures from Rama. There's 16 units down there that should be finished here pretty quick. And so that's a big win for that community. They've had some of the old teacherages from decades and decades ago. And as we continue to look to recruit, we wanted to present an item to the board to actually build housing in Gallup for the surrounding area schools. A lot of our schools in Gallup, like a Catherine Miller, a Chi Dodge, a Turpin Elementary, those schools are servicing a very rural population. And we're looking at ways in which we potentially find housing because we probably lose, Kate on, you may have a more accurate number, but I know at least between 10 and 20 teachers a year because there is no housing available. And it's pretty expensive in our area for housing, where you can find it. And there's very limited housing with all the competition for units. Gallup is kind of a landlocked community, yet David Skeet and those areas are close by, and it's sometimes difficult to find teachers that will travel a little bit when there's not housing on those campuses. And so what we are asking the board to approve is a revenue bond that would, or help move forward with the revenue bond if we are able to secure land and to build a more of a apartment complex style of housing that would predominantly serve, first of all, rural schools that are around Gallup on the edges, And then if there is extra, then we obviously look at other opportunities to help make sure that we can find staff for our schools. One of the things that I get asked when this topic comes up is, will it be free? And if the board approves it, we want to talk about what that looks like. But one of the competitive advantages that we need to keep in place is for our rural schools, so that we can attract teachers to more remote places of our county. And so what would likely happen, and if it was my decision, is to have a reduced cost, if you're living in the units that we're talking about today, and keep the free rent for those people that are serving in our more rural areas, just to make sure it's the same scenario as in Albuquerque. More people are more willing to live in Gallup than they are in Crown Point, and more people are willing to Albuquerque than they are in Gallup. And so you have to have some competitive advantage to make sure that you're filling positions. And so what that number might be is to be determined, but this action item is just for the board to weigh in on us moving forward. It's going to take a lot of work with respect to securing land, revenue bond, and those types of things. And so this is just an item for you to let us know if that's something you want us to move forward with, and before we put too much effort into it. The cost of such a facility, we're looking at probably 100 plus units. They would probably be the 2-bedroom units. To keep costs down, we try to make it as efficient as possible. It would be multiple stories. They would not be teachers housing like you would find in the rural areas where you have a duplex type of housing or one-level apartment. And part of that is for cost efficiency and flexibility. And again, one housing unit like a typical apartment complex you usually see in towns. Not a high-rise, maybe probably no more than 3 stories high or something like that. Design has not come into play yet. Obviously, we don't want to get that far down the road, putting that much money towards design. But I suspect as of right now, as a rough guess, we're around $20 million to build such a facility.
Questions, board members?
I think it's a great idea, but I think one of the things that we also need to be very careful about is who gets assigned into these units. We always say that it's going to be for, like what you said, Catherine A. Miller, or all these other David Skeets, the outlying schools. But then when things change, and then they're all inner city staff that get the advantage. And I think that's what I don't want to see. And I think but I think in the long run, it's a fabulous idea that we do get, because we all know there's limited housing and apartments here in Gallup. And I think with the additional cost, we would still have the incentive of no rent to the rural schools that really need teachers. So I'm in support of this, and I think I will go ahead and motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. Priscilla Benali motions, and second by Michael Shaw, to approve the revenue bond application to the New Mexico Finance Authority for a centralized teachers apartment complex. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Ms. Benali,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. Let's go down to new business B.
Mr. Long, can I just add a comment to this at the end? I would really like to also see in the future, we build a dorm for our students. I think that would be great for some of our kids to start having. We don't have a dorm anywhere, and I think some of our kids need that. And we need that in the rural areas, or in, like, I don't know, in one of our areas, to see how how that would benefit our children. So just a thought, but I think we would also like some dorms in the future for our children.
Okay. We go down to new business B. Approve general obligation bond refunding application to the New Mexico Finance Authority. Mike?
President Long, members of the board, we do have others in the audience and Ms. Hanks online, and I believe we also have RBC Capital available, and you have a presentation outlined before you that you received from RBC today to talk about this action item. Giovanna, am I turning it over to you, or do you want it to go straight to RBC? I'll stall here for a second. Essentially what we're doing is looking to save some money.
Mr. Hyatt, Mr. Long, members of the board, just briefly, Regina from RBC Capital is here to talk to you guys through the presentation, but please know that this is our ongoing efforts to free up any capacity that we can with our limited bonding to ensure that we can continue all of our projects that we have forthcoming. And Regina, if you wanted to briefly go over the presentation that the board has in front of them.
Mr. President, members of the board, good afternoon, everyone. Regina Geisner with RBC Capital Markets, your municipal advisor. So in front of you today is the application for refinancing of your currently outstanding bonds. But before the board will consider that, wanted to update you on the district's plan of finance as we move forward with the refunding. So as you can see here is the history of your assessed valuation. So going into tax year 2021, the district has seen a decline in its assessed value of about 11.5%. So that definitely has brought down both your 5 and 10-year average annual growth rates. And those growth rates are important as we are moving forward with planning your bond issuances of the most recent authorization from November of 2021. So as you can see here is the history of your tax rate. So we were able to maintain your GO bond tax rate level going into tax year 2021 at the historical level of $8.30. And the goal as we move forward with the refinancing and hopefully the issuance of the new money bonds later this year is to maintain that tax rate stable. And the refinancing that will be proposed to you is definitely helps managing that tax rate while saving interest to the district. So as I mentioned before, the decline in your assessed valuation going into tax year 2021 mostly came from the centrally assessed values. So you'll see that between Tri-State Generation, Western Refining, and El Segundo Coal Company, those were the major declines that affected your assessed value. And here's just the outline of your debt management plan. The district has just approved an authorization of $6 million in November of 2021. We plan to sell this in 3 installments in the next 4 years. You did also reapprove your $2 million levy, which will now be good for 6 years, and the district won't have to go back out to voters until 2027. The district does currently maintain Moody's rating of A2. However, all your recent loans have been placed with New Mexico Finance Authority given the lower cost that it provides to the district. Also, as mentioned, bonding capacity, you can see that based on the declining assessed valuation, the district has a diminishing capacity when it comes to issuing debt. So currently you have about $2 million in available capacity. As you will be moving forward this year and paying off some additional debt, that will free up some capacity for you to continue issuing bonds. And here you can see just the outline of your currently outstanding debt. So currently district has about $41.5 million in GO bonds outstanding. And you see that over time, your debt is declining. And this is what will allow us to continue going out for elections and also issue new debt moving forward without tax rate increase unless we see additional decline in your valuation. And as I mentioned, today in front of you will be resolution application for refinancing of the district's currently outstanding Series 2013 and 2014 bonds. So those both series will become callable on August 1st of 2022, meaning that they can be refinanced on a tax-exempt basis after May 1st of 2022. Both series of bonds have final maturity of August 1st of 2027, and the average rate of those outstanding bonds is 3.1%. So as we have analyzed district's debt and based on current NMFA tax exempt rates plus 25 basis points to be conservative, the net present value savings that the district could generate by refinancing the debt would be approximately $187,000 or 3%. So typically the savings in excess of 3% are considered to be economically beneficial. And as you can see here from the chart, that would save the district roughly $38,000 on average over the next 5 years. So with that, we do recommend for the district to refinance the currently outstanding Series 2013 and 2014 bonds to free up some additional capacity as you move forward down the road issuing new debt. And here's the time schedule for the refinancing of the bonds. We will be applying to New Mexico Finance Authority and presenting the loan at their meeting on March 24th, with final interest rates being set around April 5th, and the superintendent signing the bond purchase agreement around April 12th. With that, we'll be closing the refunding of the bonds around May 13th. And with that, I would be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions, board members?
Members of the board, while you're still looking through and finding questions, just want to really probably overly simplify, but essentially this is just a refinance to save money. It's kind of like not exactly a comparable, but like refinancing a house to save a little bit on payments or total expenditure for that particular loan. It's somewhat similar. In this particular case, by refinancing, we save money. Is that oversimplified, Regina? Or Giovanna?
Mike, is there any way that we can?
I think that's actually a perfect explanation. Again, borrowing and GO bonds are basically a mortgage, that the district has over 15 to 20 year time period. And now with the interest rates where they are and ability to refinance, it's the same thing.
If we are able to, is there any way we can pay into the, I want to say the principal of this, to bring this to 2034 to us, so we don't have to pay so much? Is that doable? Can we do something like that? Like if we had an extra $1 million laying around?
Well, I'm going to answer this as from Mike Hyatt's perspective, but President Long, Ms. Benali, it's typically when you have a low interest rate on something, and you can even get it lower financially, unless you're a company, maybe. I guess it depends on your situation, but typically if you have a low rate and you're able to make low payments towards something, it's better to keep making those payments and use that money that you're not spending on other items for the students. So if you take $1 million, for example, you can spend that $1 million on students, or you can spend it on students over the next 14 years. And so typically it's better, in my opinion, on average, to spend that money up front, unless you're burdened on students, unless you're burdened by that payment. That might be a different situation. Like I'll use an example like the revenue bond we had for the teacherages before. It's a significant payment. It was a lot of money, and the state gave us chunks of dollars to put towards it, and we had a little extra we could put towards it and get it over with when we had some other dollars coming in to compensate for other needs of the district. And so it made sense in that case. And it possibly could make sense. I'm just not sure what the rules are about that, because in this particular situation, you'll have to explain it, Regina or Giovanna, but you're making a commitment over a period of time for a bond. It's slightly different than a regular loan, a revenue bond. I'll let that go through. We have a delay here, so.
Well, the feds are talking of raising interest rates next month by 0.5%. Will that affect us?
I don't believe it affects us at all, and that's why you want to lock in your rate.
And Mike, Mr. Long,
Go ahead.
sorry for the delay again, and Regina can probably speak to this as well, is that, these bonds are issued for a period of time. We don't really have the opportunity to call those bonds except when allowable. And Regina can probably give some more information on that. But we also set the tax rate at a specific rate in order to collect the debt for these bonds. So these are not operational dollars that are being paid towards the bond. Regina, did you want to provide some more information?
Yes, thank you, Giovanna. That is correct, Mr. President, members of the board, superintendent. So the bonds are actually repaid out of tax dollars, and the district does collect a certain amount every year to repay those bonds. So in the event the district did decide to use, let's say, operational dollars to repay the debt, it would take you, potentially up to 15 years to pay yourselves back. And like the superintendent mentioned, you would be able to actually spend those operational dollars up front for the more immediate needs of the district versus prepaying the debt that has been structured to repay over a 15-year period. And again, if we see the opportunities to refinance, we come in front of the board every chance we get to make sure that you participate in those opportunities and take advantage of the lower interest rates. We have done one refinancing in 2020, so we're proposing to do a refinancing this year. We'll see if the debt that you have callable in the next few years will be possible to be refinanced as well. And in the event the district did have additional cash collected from those tax dollars, that could potentially in the future be used to prepay some of the debt early. However, given some of the decline in your assessed valuation, the district is just maintaining the tax rate stable and paying off the debt as it's structured. And given the fact that all of your recent borrowings have been through New Mexico Finance Authority and you did receive disadvantaged funding through them, those rates are lower than what you would have gotten in the public markets. So like the superintendent mentioned, prepaying the debt that could potentially be at 0% might not be most beneficial to the district at this time.
Mr. Long, I have another question, please.
Priscilla.
Thank you. Mr. Hyatt, on page 3, it has major taxpayers. how is this now going to affect us with Tri-State and the other pipeline company that we no longer have?
Yeah, President Long, Ms. Benali, as Regina just said, she alluded to the decrease in capacity that we have as a district to raise revenue. And that is due to directly what you just talked about. It has to do with the power plants being shut down and other local companies closing shop. When that happens, especially in this case, along with, there was also I believe, an Navajo Nation lawsuit with the county over taxability of their land in the county. All of that combined, we took a massive hit to the amount of money we're able to generate through our bonding capacity. And so there's not much there. That's another one of the issues that we're fighting currently with our capital lawsuit with the state, is that we didn't have a lot of bonding capacity as a district, and now we have very, very little because of those companies moving out. And it ties back to, there were some bills this year that we're working to revitalize our power plant. It was a hydrogen bill. Patty Lundstrom and I believe the governor were behind it. It didn't make it through. Try to revitalize those companies or those opportunities so that our bonding capacity would then go up, and then we would have opportunity for more revenue. But our bonding capacity is very, very low. If you go to a city center, if you go to a Santa Fe or an oil-wealthy area, they don't have the same problems we do. And so when we lose the very little industry that we have, or taxable value, then we get hit significantly hard, and we were. So when somebody asks me, "Oh, you must be loving all that impact aid," and I said, basically, it went to cover all the revenue or the bonding capacity that we lost. So we're not as far ahead as people might think we are. Any further questions, members of the board?
Mike? Michael?
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Motion to approve the general obligation bond refunding application to the New Mexico Finance Authority.
Okay, a motion's been made by Michael Schaaf to approve new business B. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Ms. Benali,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, board members. We have
Thank you, Regina.
new business C, approval of signing incentive and moving expense for classroom, SPED, and new teachers.
President Long, members of the board, I'm going to invite up Ms. Montano, Assistant Superintendent for HR and SPED and a few other places. I'll mention a few things, and I hope I don't want to steal your thunder, Kate, on, because lots of exciting things here.
Thank you.
But as I mentioned before in my report, we need to be competitive, and this is the time when we have federal funds and other opportunities to attract teachers. It's the administration's position that we need to do all that we can to get these positions filled for our students. Again, we will have openings, and it's going to be highly competitive across the country. There are a lot of incentives and things that are happening across the country where we need to be competitive so that we can get them here to our students here in New Mexico, in McKinley County specific. And so these are some significant amounts that we're asking the board to approve. We suspect, again, close to 100 or so teachers that would be leaving this year. One of the things that we have found that has been helpful and been asked for by recruits is moving expenses. And so we did have a moving expense last year, but it wasn't a lot, but it was something. But this year with federal funding, we may have an opportunity here to attract through moving expenses a significant amount. And more importantly, we wanted to figure out a way to outdo all of our neighbors, and hopefully really we're in a position where we're stealing from our neighbors to get the best teachers here because everybody's other incentives went up the same, whether it's pay or insurance or those types of things. And so in this particular action item, we wanted to incentivize those who are local to our county to hire on with us. And so you'll see a different amount for those that graduated from high school in our county. It doesn't have to be from McKinley County Schools, but from our county. And then a little bit lesser amount for those who are nearby, who are graduates from high school or college within the Navajo Nation or New Mexico boundaries. But then also offer incentive for anybody that comes that's outside of those two geographical areas, that we also put some money towards trying to get them here, so that we are highly competitive against other districts across the country. And so what do you want to add, Kate? I probably said too much.
President Long, members of the board, I'm just going to go through the cost, what we want to be offering new teachers coming into our district. So as Mr. Hyatt stated, the moving expenses, so people moving into Gallup McKinley County Schools up to 100 miles away, we would offer them $2,500 to help with their move. 100 miles up to 299 miles, we would move that up to $3,500, and then 300 plus miles that they would be moving into our district would be $4,500, and we feel like that would help them get an apartment set up, get things moved in and ready to start. And this would be for all classroom teachers as well as special education teachers. Now, as far as signing incentive to bring new teachers into our districts, we really look at growing our own and trying to bring people from within our county here. So anybody that graduates from McKinley County, high school graduate that's gone on to college and got their teaching degree, or on an alternative licensure, we would offer $22,000 as a signing bonus. That would be paid through 2 years. So we want them here 2 years, and we would do that at the end of the first semester in December, in May, and the same way for the next year. So it would be divided into 4 installments. For New Mexico graduates, high school or college, and anybody within the Navajo Nation boundaries, we would offer $20,000. And then all other out-of-state new teachers coming into our district would be $18,000. And this is basically just to encourage people. We want qualified, certified teachers to come into our district to provide services for our students. The requirements for this, you can see at the bottom of our sheet, would be they need to be a new employee who was not employed in any certified capacity within the 21-22 school year.
So I want to clarify that too. You can still, I guess I would be careful what I said. You can still work for the district, but if you were a teacher this last year, then it wouldn't count for that. But let's say you were an educational assistant and you just finished up your qualifications, and then you wanted to be hired and you fit these categories, then you would receive it. So I want to clarify my comment about working for the district prior. Questions from the board?
Questions?
Yeah,
Kevin?
I have a question. I mean, my question is just kind of related to, have we started, or are we still doing our recruiting? I know they had a recruiting thing just recently at NAU. Were we a part of that? This was last week.
President Long, members of the board, we have been doing a lot of different things. Sometimes it's kind of weird in the recruiting world. Sometimes going to a place is best one year, and the next year it could be the worst thing. Or a lot of states are stopping us from going to their state because they're having, Arizona's one of them. They have such a shortage of teachers there also that they stopped for several years us even being able to go there. Now, I'm not sure about this particular one, whether they allowed people from the outside, but I know they stopped us at ASU, for example, going to their fairs because they only let in-state districts attend their job fairs. That's how competitive it's getting. And so we didn't go to NAU, I know that. But we have done research on, where there's an excess of teachers. We've been pretty heavy online presence, social media presence to target, and using the data to target those areas specifically, and a host of other things. Maybe you could talk some more on some of those other ways in which we reach out. But
President Long, members of the board, yes, we've used geofencing, which is an online targeting areas. We've hit Arizona hard with social media, online, as well as newspaper, radio ads. We use KRQE for ads within the state. We've been on the big billboard at the Isotope Stadium. We're looking into some more things to be creative with that right now. We hit our surrounding states very hard with the geofencing and targeted, and that's basically when a applicant is maybe searching for jobs, teacher jobs, GMCS pops up. So we have a lot of good data on that, where they actually go into our website and have gone all the way through the whole process. We can track to see what jobs they applied for. We've used that for a couple of years. We hit some other states that have university teacher programs where we know they're graduating more students, and so we try to hit those areas as well. We actually call universities within the state and our surrounding areas. We email graduates. We reach out to them personally, trying to entice them to come to Gallup McKinley County Schools. So anything new we try to come up with and be creative and do things a little bit different. As of course, virtual job fairs, things like that, we've been in quite a bit as well.
With that being said, do we have any data showing like the percentages of what's coming in from all these different ads, like the TV ad, the radio ads, newspaper, or whatever? Do we have any data showing that it's worth we're getting worth what we're paying into a TV ad as far as people coming in from that?
Mr. Mitchell, members of the board, yes, we have kept data on that. We've received pretty good feedback from the TV ads, newspaper ads, and we get reports from our geofencing as well. I don't have them at my fingerprints right now, but I actually know how many clicks that we have going into the GMCS website.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Board members?
It doesn't pertain to this part of it, but I would like to, maybe in the next board meeting, also see what the incentives are for our bus drivers, and if there's any for paraprofessionals. And I know we contract subs and food services out, but are they doing any kind of incentives, sign-on incentives? Thank you.
President Long, members of the board, I'll just make a few comments about that. There'll be more coming. This is just the first round, so we can start recruiting more heavily as this is the season. But as you know, you approved some incentives for substitute teachers this year. You also approved incentives for bus drivers, and we plan to bring several of those back to you in those areas where we're having a hard time filling. It really, really helps. We appreciate the board and their efforts in recognizing the needs when they come up. We didn't know that we were going to have trouble finding bus drivers, but the incentive that you approved for them was perfect, and it really, really helped us. There's some positions we're not having as hard of time finding, and so we're really trying to target those dollars where we are going to have the toughest time. We feel like we're going to have the toughest time finding individuals, so qualified, good individuals.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. With that, I'd like to motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Motion's been made by Priscilla Benali and second by Michael Shaw to approve signing incentives and moving expenses for classroom, SPED, and new teachers. Second by Michael Shaw. Roll call, Joan.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Ms. Benali,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes. Thank you, Kadon.
Mr. Long, before we adjourn, I would like to request our superintendent and members of the staff to continue, we need, to spread the word on the 2022 scholarship program that the New Mexico School Board Association is giving out to seniors. The deadline for that is April 15th.
Thank you. I think we have, but if not, we'll put it on Facebook also.
Yeah. Michael?
Motion to approve, to adjourn.
Okay, motion's been made by Michael Shaw to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin Mitchell. Roll call, Joan?
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes.
Ms. Benali,
Yes.
Mr. Shaw,
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
2:09.
2:09, we're adjourned, board members.
Yeah,
Thank you, staff.
thank you all.
Thank you for being here.